Hello, everybody. In the first two lectures, we covered some basic positions, king and pawn against king, and so on. In the third lecture, I gave you some tools that you can use to analyze pawn endgames. Now, in this lecture, what we're going to be doing is taking those two things as a combination and using them to look at more complicated examples. In future lectures, we'll continue this to more complicated pawn endgames, some advanced themes, so on, but the basic part is over. So this first position, we're going to try to look at using the ideas I've taught you. So someone who is inexperienced with pawn endgames would have very little knowledge on what to make of this. They might notice, 3 pawns, 3, same side, same files, draw, so on. But now again, we can use what we've learned to make a better analysis. So the first thing we notice, white's king is more advanced. No pawn weaknesses, obviously. Like I said, same files. And basically, we want to use these considerations to decide what white should do. So one thing we notice is that what black would like to do is activate his king, and then white's advantage is gone. So what white naturally wants to do is stop that. So our first move to consider should be b4, preventing king to c5. And now if black does nothing, plays c6, then white's king comes in, and now he wins. And I can show you. So d4, c3. Now white has the opposition, and as you can see, black is going to lose his pawns. So that comes back to the idea of keeping the opposition. And now here black's king has to make a final retreat. This one's fatal because this pawn is losing. So over the last few moves, we've just seen. So naturally, we see from that black can't afford to just adopt a sit and wait strategy, because as you saw, white's king gets in slowly but surely. So that brings back to our opposition idea. And now knowing that black can't just sit there, we should decide what else he would want to do, because we can't rely on our opponents not knowing what to do in these positions. So if sitting and waiting doesn't work for black, he's probably going to try something active. c5 comes to mind. So now again, we have to decide what white should do. And this point is actually very important. So the first thing to remember is that we want to keep black's king out. Of course, by instinct teaches us that we want to watch out for this b4 pawn. But now you know that even if black takes this, it doesn't really do him any good, because these two pawns can't make any sort of a passer. So white actually has an extremely nice move here. If you didn't know pawn endgames, you'd almost never get it. It's still pretty tricky to see. But now that we know black, it doesn't do any good for black to have doubled pawns, and the important thing is to keep his king back. We might get a result like we saw before when black played c6. White actually has the very nice move d4. And this is hopeless for black. I'll show you a few moves. So say he takes d4. It really doesn't matter which one he takes. The result's the same. King f6. Black moves. White plays king e5. King e6, and his pawns go. And if black tries to play d3, white takes, d4, and now white just goes after this pawn. And so now white is utilizing his king position, black's in zugzwang, and white wins this pawn in the game. And so here we see that, especially considering that black can't make the passed pawn as we saw, that white's king position is really the deciding factor here. I mean, imagine if, say, white was on e2 and black was on e4. Black would easily have at least a draw at that point, and good chances for a win. And so yes, if he takes here, same idea, king here, this pawn is lost and the game's over. And of course, c4 has the same basic problem. So just to show you what I meant, At this position, it's very important because it's natural to defend the b4 pawn or get rid of it. That would actually be a very sad mistake to make because both c3 and b takes c5 are actually losing moves. And that seems a little strange at first, but just to show you, if white plays c3, the idea being to defend b4, black actually has a very tricky move. I haven't taught you too much about this yet, but it's a very nice theme to know. Black plays d4. And so the problem is here, black's got 3 pawns attacking 2, even though white has a third one, it's not doing any good. And regardless of how white takes, if he takes d4, black doesn't recapture when he gets the lost position from earlier, but he takes on b4. Now he's got the outside passed pawn, and the game's over, but with the opposite result. And if white takes c5, black takes, and as you can see, he's going to get this passed pawn next move anyways, and it's still going to queen. So you do have to be very careful to watch out for this. And this is just one of many themes. Since there's so many themes, a lot of it is you're unable to just memorize. You should know the basic idea of using breakthrough like this, but you can't memorize everything. So what I urge here is the importance of calculation. Consider all your opponent's possible moves. I mean, for example, in this case, don't assume he's going to do you the favor of taking your pawn or playing king c6. Because even more so in the middle game, even in tactical positions, even more so, knowing just what to play is key. For example, if white takes on c5, black takes, and now black's gotten the active king, which is exactly what he was after in the first place. And in fact, if white plays c3, black has the d4 theme all over again. If white plays king e5, to go for after black's pawns, black plays b4. Now white's the one in zugzwang, and when he moves his king, black plays king d4, and his next few moves, he's going to be winning these pawns. And as you can see, this is useless. And black's next 2 moves are capture, followed by taking the other pawn or b3. And no matter how much raw memorization you do, you're not going to be able to have every position down. That's just impossible. So the key is know these ideas and think hard during pawn endgames. That is by far, in any endgame, that is by far the most important thing to do. And so here, for example, we realized that c3 and capturing loses. With our themes, we figured out d4. And so someone who knows what to do here and someone who thinks it over will be a full point ahead of someone who doesn't know what to do and doesn't think it over. That's just one basic example of just how important these applications are. So for another one, this is slightly trickier, but same ideas, using calculation and reasoning with the ideas you have, you can figure it out. Again, we have 3 pawns each. This time we've got 2 different structures of 2 pawns against 1, which does make it slightly trickier. So again, someone who's white, probably reasoning, the 2 on 1 might be pretty even. But using especially what we learned in the previous lectures, we noticed that white has a key advantage. These black pawns are in the formation I discussed, where they can't make a passed pawn without giving one to white. However, white doesn't have the same problem. He can play h4 and g5, and he's got his passed pawn. And so here, white has a distinct advantage. In fact, he's winning. And if you didn't know these ideas, you have no idea how to figure that out, but using what we've just learned, now we can. And so, if black plays king f7, white brings his king up, make sure e5 doesn't happen. And then, white makes his passed pawn, h4, black backs up. So white advances his king one more time, Now, plays g5. And another theme we've discussed, when you've got the outside passed pawn, you don't try to promote it, that's impossible. But rather, just give it up. And now, so you remember from king and pawn, white gets a key square, and this pawn's going to queen. So you give up the outside passed pawn, but in return you get 2 black pawns, and you win the game. Okay. And so, basic idea, white's got the passed pawn potential, but black doesn't. Be a very different position if, say, for example, moving the pawn from e6 to e4, very small difference, a couple squares, but it changes the outcome completely. Now black has a passed pawn, and white's the one in trouble. Okay, and so some of you might have noticed black does have a way to try to stir things up. So if he's lost anyway, he can play e5, which does give him a passed pawn, and try to trade. So if he goes after white's pawn, then you do have to be careful here, because if you just try to make a second pawn, black advances his, make a passed pawn, black keeps advancing, but now we've noticed this pawn's about to queen. So you have to defend, black captures your pawn, take, and now all of a sudden it's a draw. And unfortunately, I can't give you a straightforward theme of this. As I was saying, there's too many possible examples to just give an overall theme for everything. But the key here is just calculation. You just have to think it over, consider what you can do, what he can do, and judge from there. So, starting from this position, first thing we notice is that the white king moves, this pawn is lost, then black's got a passed pawn, and he's certainly not going to lose at that point. So h4 is necessary. Black plays d4. But now at this point, there's no need to play g5, because at that point, your king is diverted even farther away from your pawns. And this pawn structure is weakened. So there's another possibility to consider, king e4. And again, there's no basic theme for this. You just have to consider the possibilities. And you definitely want to do that ahead of time. It doesn't do you any good to figure out you had a win when you're in a lost position. So black plays d3, or else he'll just be 2 pawns down. White takes. Black takes. King e3. And in fact, white is winning this. It's hard to know at first. You largely do want to calculate this out also. But just some basic ideas. So the first thing we notice is that when black backs up, white advances. And now, another key point we want to notice is that if black plays h5, which is a possibility, white doesn't take, which gives him 2 rook pawns in the drawn endgame we saw in the first lecture, but rather he plays g5. And this position was in the second lecture. It is in fact one for white, as you should know if you watched the lecture. So just look that over if you don't know what I'm referring to. And so black's going to avoid doing that if he knows the position. But white has the opposition, so he can advance. And basically, you just have to calculate this out. There's no shortcut around that. So like I said, there's an enormous number of possibilities. And there's no overall theme you can apply to any position to get an exact result. Chess is too complicated for that. Okay. One more position. So this pawn endgame is actually very interesting because it was adjourned and then adjudicated as a draw. This game is fairly old. And again, okay, someone unfamiliar with pawn endgames is not going to have any idea what to do here. But let's use the themes we've learned about. Black's up a pawn, but it doesn't do him much good because it's doubled, and as we know, that doesn't do any good in serving Black's purpose as a passed pawn. Second thing we notice is that this kingside structure, the pawns are unbalanced. This one's on the H file, this one's on the F file. And so, thinking about the themes, this actually gives Black the advantage because he can get the outside passer. He has the outside pawn. In general, that's better. And so, in fact, when he plays H4, unless White's very foolish, he's not going to take and just give Black the passed pawn, but he's going to play King H3. And when Black takes, White's got a very nice sort of fortress setup. And so what we have to do is some preliminary work, because we really don't want White to have this fortress, so we don't want to play H4 to begin with. What we'd really prefer is to have this position with the king here and the king here, but with White to move, so that White has to break his fortress. So, just thinking backwards, this means that when White takes on G3, we want to play King F5. And so we just waste, so basically what we do is waste a move. Black plays King F6, White plays to H3, so no H4 yet. Play to G6, as long as it's to F5. White moves back, and now we play H4. If White captures, Black gets the outside passed pawn. And just to show you really quickly, this is dead one for Black. First thing you'll do is take this pawn, then these. So White plays King H3, Black takes, King takes, and now King F5. Okay, so now Black's getting in here. White plays King G2 so that he can oppose Black. But here we see the advantage in having this extra pawn. It serves as a tempo, or basically it burns a move so that Black gets the opposition. White moves, and now if White plays to G2, Black goes over, takes the pawn, and as you can calculate, and this is what you have to do, as you can calculate, Black promotes first, and the game is over. So this all seems extremely complicated at first. And we're up to about 15 moves in that line, the promotion. But if you know how to calculate, if you know the themes, you can figure out what to do and just look it over from there. So White's going to want to go to E2, make it more complicated. King here, King E3. So now we do have a problem. White's got the opposition at the moment. Black plays to G2. White will take the opposition with King E2. If he goes to H2, White goes back to D2. If he goes to G1, White goes to E1. We've just got these opposing squares. And if Black's unfortunate enough to play G4, White takes, and then plays King E4 and wins Black's pawns. So again, this all seems extremely complicated, and to an extent it is. So it's very understandable to be fairly confused right now. But just the basic idea of you continuously applying these themes, just being careful to calculate as precisely as possible. And so in fact, Black does have a winning move here. It's pretty much impossible to just see. But if we notice this whole opposing squares idea, then this move actually makes sense, King H3. Because now, White can't keep the opposition. He can't go to D3 because it violates the rules of chess. If he plays F4, Black plays G4 and promotes. And so if he goes here, Black takes the opposition and gets in. It's the same theme as before in the first position. When black had the pawns here, and white's king just kept sneaking in further and further. It's the same basic idea. Black's king keeps sneaking in. And in fact, he can take this pawn right here, which makes it even easier. But as we can see, this is lost. And lastly, white has king e4, king here. And another thing you just have to calculate, these pawn races. As you can see, black's going to promote first by a mile because white has to play 3 moves to take these and get off. But there's no formula for that. It's just a matter of calculation, persistence, and applying the themes I mentioned. So if you know your ideas, corresponding squares, the opposition that was so useful a few moves ago, and if you just keep at it and don't rush any positions, which can be extremely costly, then you should be able to figure these out. And of course, there's no substitute for experience. There's too many types of pawn endgames to just memorize or learn every type. So practical play will do wonders for it too. So those were 3 positions, which if I had shown at the first lecture would probably have seemed impossible. But now that we have a good grasp of pawn ending fundamentals, they were very understandable. And this position, for example, is almost 15 moves long. And we figured everything out. Black's opposition, his pawn tempo, and his outside pawn. So that just goes to show how useful it can be. So I recommend you keep that up. Thank you all for listening, and goodbye.